Did you know? The Simpsons was originally supposed to be an adaptation of the comic strip Life in Hell. In 1987, producer James L. Brooks was looking for someone to make minute-long animations for Fox's upcoming comedy series, The Tracy Ullman Show. After receiving a copy of the comic strip as a gift, Brooks was so impressed that he asked the creator Matt Groening to write shorts for the new show. The initial plan was to use the Life in Hell characters in the new shorts. However, Groening was concerned about losing the copyright to his own characters. He quickly sketched out some new characters before going to a meeting with James L. Brooks. The producer agreed to the new characters and work on The Simpsons soon began. Because he put them together so quickly, Groening named most of the characters after his own family. His parents were called Homer and Margaret, and he has two sisters called Lisa and Maggie. Bart is the only member of the family with an original name, as Groening thought it would be too obvious to name the character after himself. The shorts were also intended to be in black and white, like Groening's comic strips. However, the animators offered to color the cartoon at no extra cost, as they felt that the primitive designs of the characters should be counterbalanced with vibrant colors. Color designer Georgie Palouse suggested giving the characters yellow skin, and Groening approved. There are several reasons for this, such as how Groening disliked the pink shades usually used for animated characters' skin and wanted the show to stand out. One of the series' directors, David Silverman, suggested that yellow was chosen because Bart, Lisa, and Maggie have no hairline. In an interview, he said, "With yellow, you buy it as hair and skin color. If they were flesh-colored, the hair would be, freak show." For the shorts, Matt Groening would draw a rough storyboard for each episode. Groening was surprised when he first saw the shorts animated, as he assumed the animators would tidy up his drawings. Instead, they copied his drawings and animated from there, giving the initial cartoons a cruder look than the later TV show. The shorts quickly became a popular part of the Tracy Ullman Show, and there was word of extending The Simpsons into half-hour specials. Brooks was insistent that the show got a full season of episodes, but the chairman of Fox, Barry Diller, was unsure about commissioning a full series. Back then, the most successful primetime cartoon ever made was The Flintstones, which had ended years ago. Making a new primetime animated series seemed like a risky move, and sticking to specials would be the safer option. However, Brooks eventually convinced the network to back a 13-episode season of The Simpsons. Sam Simon, an experienced writer and producer, was hired to develop the shorts into a full TV show, and a new writing team was assembled. Despite this, the show came close to being canceled before it even aired. The episode Some Enchanted Evening was originally planned to be the show's season premiere, but when the first animation came back from the Korean studio, it was very low quality. The team were appalled at the prospect of opening the series with bad animation. Many of the scenes had off-model character designs and poor camera angles. According to producer Michael Mendel, it was a complete disaster. It was unairable. Reportedly, the producers considered canceling the show entirely if the next episode wasn't any better. In the end, the show was delayed to give the animators time to correct the episode. Most of the original animation was thrown out entirely, though some of it can still be seen in the final episode. The creators decided to open the season with the Christmas episode, Simpsons roasting on an open fire instead, making Some Enchanted Evening the season finale. The show's theme song was composed by Danny Elfman, who wrote it in just a few days. After being shown the opening title sequence, Elfman decided to compose a retro theme. Elfman wanted it to sound like the Hanna-Barbera cartoon that never was, as he found the opening reminiscent of the Flintstones. During the car ride away from the initial meeting, Elfman began working out the song in his head, and he immediately recorded a demo when he got home. He described it as the easiest thing he's ever done, as the demo was quickly approved. Elfman and a few of his friends also sing the opening notes to the theme song, and he continues to receive performance royalties from it to this day. Some ideas for the show were dropped early on. Originally, Krusty the Clown was going to be Homer's alter ego. The idea was that Homer would be too ashamed to tell his family about his secret second job. The irony would be that while Bart has no respect for Homer, he idolizes Krusty. Matt Groening also wanted to reveal that Marge Simpson had rabbit ears hidden under her hair. At some point, she would let her hair down, revealing them for the first time. The idea was that she would be like the main characters from Life in Hell, who are anthropomorphic rabbits. Though the writers refused to use the idea in the show, some of Marge's character sprites in the Simpsons arcade game show her with rabbit ears under her hair. Some of the show's characters were also inspired by real people. Moe was partly based on the late Louis Red Deutsch, a bartender and former boxer who frequently fell for prank calls. In the 1970s, two men would phone his bar and trick him into calling out fake names like Alcoholic and Ben Dover. If he caught on to the joke, he started swearing at the caller and describing the violent things he would do to them. Over 100 calls were made before the pranksters stopped. Recordings of the calls began to circulate in the 1980s, inspiring Moe and Bart's phone conversations in the show. Mr. Burns' character design was based on former Fox chairman Barry Diller. According to Groening, this was part of an in-joke among the staff. Groening said, "The joke used to be, who's Burns based on? Barry Diller. Who's Smithers based on? Everyone else at Fox." Other characters also got their names from Matt Groening's family. His mother's maiden name was Wiggum, which he gave to the police chief. When Groening named the character, he didn't know that Chief Wiggum would become one of the show's stupidest characters, saying that aspect has nothing to do with the actual Wiggum family. Originally, Ralph and Chief Wiggum were not relatives. It wasn't until the season 4 episode I Love Lisa that the writers decided to make them father and son. They thought the episode would be funnier if Lisa angered the police chief by dumping Ralph. Surprisingly, Matt Groening pitched a live-action spin-off series about Krusty the Clown in 1994. The series would star Dan Castellaneta and follow Krusty as he moves to LA to host his own talk show. A full pilot script was written for the pitch, including a running gag where Krusty lived in a house on stilts that were constantly being gnawed on by beavers. Somebody pointed out that the gag would be very expensive to put together, and the creators realized that animation would allow them greater freedom than live action. Contract negotiations for the animated version of the spin-off stalled, however, and the project was shelved. Though there are currently no plans to end The Simpsons itself, showrunner Al Jean has revealed the possible way to end the show. Jean said, "I thought it would be cool if in the last episode they're getting ready to go to a Christmas pageant, and they go to the Christmas pageant that opens up the first episode, Simpsons roasting on an open fire, so the entire series is a loop with no end. That would be my way of concluding the run, but nobody's asked me for it yet." Another behind-the-scenes secret is that Maggie's sucking sound effects are performed by Matt Groening himself. The series has also seen its fair share of conflict. The 1995 episode A Star is Burns prominently featured the character Jay Sherman from Fox's other primetime animated show at the time, The Critic. Matt Groening wasn't a fan of this episode, however. Groening saw the episode as a cheap and jarring crossover and withdrew his name from the show's opening credits for the first time ever. Groening told the Los Angeles Times, "The two reasons I'm opposed to this crossover is that I don't want any credit or blame for the critic, and I feel this encroachment of another cartoon character violates the Simpsons universe. The critic has nothing to do with the Simpsons world." Simpsons producer James L. Brooks had a different outlook and wasn't a fan of Groening's behavior. Brooks said, "This has been my worst fear, that the Matt we know privately is going public. He is a gifted, adorable, cuddly ingrate, but his behavior right now is rotten, and it's not pretty when a rich man acts like this." It'd be almost 2 decades before The Simpsons prominently featured characters from another show, aside from small cameos such as Season 9's King of the Hill reference. Speaking of cameos, the series has a recurring cameo with Sideshow Bob. Bob was originally going to be voiced by James Earl Jones, but was ultimately voiced by Kelsey Grammer of Cheers and Frasier fame. Grammer initially based Bob's character on American actor and director Ellis Rabb, but the role evolved into a parody of Grammer himself and his character on the show Frasier. This point was referenced when Bob's family members were introduced to the show. Bob's brother Cecil is voiced by David Hyde Pierce, who plays Frasier's brother Niles in the show. Bob's father is also voiced by the late John Mahoney, who played Frasier's father, Martin Crane. There's a widespread belief among Simpsons fans that Bob was named after Terwilliger Boulevard in Portland, Oregon. This would make sense because many elements from The Simpsons reference Portland, as show creator Matt Groening was born there. However, this isn't the case, and Bob was actually named after Dr. Terwilliger from the 1953 movie The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T. Another interesting detail about Sideshow Bob is that his prisoner number was 24601. This is the same prisoner number as Jean Valjean in Les Mis. Funnily enough, Principal Skinner's prisoner number in Vietnam was also 24601.
Are you ready, kids?
Aye, aye, Captain!
I can't hear you!
Aye, aye, Captain!
Oh!
Did you know? According to one of the show's writers, Doug Lawrence, the main cast of SpongeBob SquarePants were originally based on the 7 deadly sins. Some characters' sins are obvious, like Mr. Krabs' greed, Plankton's envy, Sandy's pride, and Patrick's sloth. But the other sins are not as clear. Wrath could be Squidward because he has a bad temper. Gluttony could be Gary because of a running joke where SpongeBob must frequently feed the pet snail. Even then, it's not clear which character is supposed to be Lust. Some fans suggest Pearl because she was one of the first characters designed for the show and is often portrayed as boy crazy. Other fans suggest SpongeBob as Lust because of his deep love for his friends. However, it's likely the 7 deadly sins theme was only used as a rough guideline for designing characters and didn't stay for long. While developing SpongeBob, Stephen Hillenburg drew inspiration from one of his earlier projects. It was an educational comic called Inner Tidal Zone, which he made while working as a marine biologist. Hillenburg later attended Cal Arts and began a career in animation working on Rocko's Modern Life. During Rocko's final season, Hillenburg was asked to come up with ideas for a funny animal show. At first, he wasn't interested in creating a new cartoon, describing the workload as torturous, but his opinion changed after meeting with a Rocko writer, Martin Olson. Olson found the Intertitle Zone comic and told Hillenburg, "What are you, crazy? This is your show." As he brainstormed ideas for new characters, Hillenburg honed in on the sea sponge because he liked their strange shapes. But he later doodled the character as a kitchen sponge and found that the square shape was a good symbol for a nerdy personality. He wanted the sponge to be innocent and genuine like Pee Wee Herman or Jerry Lewis. In fact, while developing the pitch for SpongeBob, Hillenburg and creative director Derek Drymon would watch Jerry Lewis films for inspiration, specifically The Errand Boy. At the beginning, SpongeBob's name was actually going to be Sponge Boy, and the show was going to be called Sponge Boy Ahoy. The name was changed after the team discovered the trademark for Sponge Boy was already registered for a series called Flaming Carrot Comics.
Sponge Boy, me Bob!
The name SpongeBob came from Hillenburg's Intertitle Zone comic, which had a character named Bob the Sponge. The surname SquarePants came from an improv session between Hillenburg and Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob. Kenny said the line, "What's a sponge with square pants and a tie thinking he can get a job at a fast food restaurant?" They felt the name SquarePants fit the clean-cut and nerdy personality of the character. At one point, SpongeBob could have had the voice for Plankton. Mr. Lawrence originally auditioned for the role of SpongeBob with a voice he described as a combination of Gregory Peck and Tony the Tiger.
I'm ready. Hey, Gary, it's a beautiful day.
The staff couldn't stop laughing at his audition and decided to give him the role for Plankton instead.
Ah, the sea. So fascinating. So wonderful.
The narrator for SpongeBob has a French accent as an homage to oceanographer Jacques Cousteau. Cousteau was a pioneer of an early scuba gear system called the Aqualung. The device was used to film life underwater in a way that had never been seen before, and it inspired Hillenburg's lifelong interest in the ocean.
I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready.
SpongeBob SquarePants!
SpongeBob originally had an opening that was completely different than the one known today. This opening sequence was created in 1997 along with the pilot episode Help Wanted. The show wouldn't debut publicly for another 2 years, and by then the opening sequence was replaced. The final opening features the actual lips of Hillenburg superimposed over a pirate named Painty the Pirate.
Who lives in a pineapple under the sea?
SpongeBob!
The melody of the theme song is very similar to an Old English sea shanty called Blow the Man Down.
I'll sing you a song, a good song of the sea to me. Way, hey, blow the man down.
Hillenburg wanted the opening to be as loud and annoying as possible to excite children, making them scream and jump and wake up their parents in the morning. SpongeBob's house also has a hidden reason behind its eccentricity. He lives in a pineapple because the fruit has been traditionally seen as a symbol of hospitality in Western countries. During the colonial era, sculptures of pineapples were common features in doorways and other architectural decorations. But this symbolism was lost on Nickelodeon executives, who thought SpongeBob's house was too bizarre. The writers actually poked fun of the executives' reaction in the pilot episode.
Yes, of course he lives in a pineapple, you silly.
Nickelodeon executives feared that the show wouldn't resonate with children. At one point, they demanded SpongeBob be a child who lives with his parents and goes to school. Hillenburg hated this idea and almost walked away from the project altogether. Ultimately, they reached a compromise where certain episodes would feature SpongeBob's parents and he would occasionally attend boating school. The pilot episode tested well with children, and it was eventually given a green light. The show continued the storyboard-driven writing process used in Rocko, as well as Ren and Stimpy. This resulted in more visual gags and gave the show a different feel compared to script-based cartoons like The Simpsons. But it would occasionally cause internal conflict. According to animation director Andrew Overtomb, the team's animation directors and storyboarders didn't get along. The storyboarders had a specific vision for the show, and if that vision was changed in the animation process, they weren't pleased. This could go both ways, however. Sometimes storyboard writers would insist on changes after the animators started working, which would deeply annoy the animators. Steven Hillenburg and his staff never imagined SpongeBob would become a global hit. At best, they expected a level of success similar to Rocko's Modern Life or Ren and Stimpy. At the beginning of production, Hillenburg said he'd be happy doing only 1 season, but he actually stuck with the project for 3 seasons and a movie. According to writer Sam Henderson, Hillenburg planned to end SpongeBob after the 3rd season so they wouldn't, quote, jump the shark. There was a sense around the office that the crew were running out of fresh ideas. Kent Osborne, a writer who joined the staff for season 3, said, "I came in with a million ideas, and I'd say, hey, let's do this, and they'd say, nah, we already did one like that. And not just SpongeBob. Story editor Meriwether Williams had worked on Angry Beavers, and she'd say, oh, we did that on Beavers." SpongeBob was one of the network's most popular shows, and Nickelodeon made sure the show continued. But the staff didn't share the network's enthusiasm. It turned out the process of creating SpongeBob was grueling, time-consuming, and paid poorly. One writer for SpongeBob stated in an interview with Hogan's Alley, "You'd be horrified to hear what we all got paid. When you compare our salaries to the amount of money our work generated, we may well be the lowest paid people in the history of the planet." After the first movie, Hillenburg walked away from his position, feeling like he'd accomplished everything he'd set out to do. Many staff members left the series at this point too, either due to creative burnout or the desire to work on something new. The show started a 4th season with a restructured staff, which also resulted in a shift in tone and style for the show. Some fans had a negative reaction to this change, but Stephen Hillenburg stated that he was happy the show had new blood working on it. Steve and some members of the early crew returned to work on the second SpongeBob film, Sponge Out of Water, released in 2015.
Did you know? The original Japanese opening for the Pokemon anime talks about what's up girls' skirts. The first line in the opening is, "Even if in fire, in water, in grass, in forests, in ground, in clouds, in that girl's skirt. Eek." The line is repeated later in the extended version, ending with, "In that girl's skirt. You're persistent." There's other instances of inappropriate language in the original Japanese anime. The episode The School of Hard Knocks, after seeing a picture of the schoolgirl Giselle, Brock enthusiastically says, "I'll look forward to her in 8 years." In the English dub, this was changed to Brock saying, "She can violate my rights anytime." But in the Kids WB airing of the show, even this edit was removed. The Japanese version also had several religious references that were changed in the English release. The episode Ash Catches a Pokemon was altered to remove a mention of heaven and hell. In the Japanese dub, Ash comments on how the inside of a Pokeball must be a pleasant place for Pokemon to be, then mentions how himself and Pokemon are both heaven. This is followed by Misty saying that Ash's heaven is her hell. In the English dub, Ash proclaims his love for his newly caught Caterpie, and Misty chimes in by saying, "I guess it takes a worm to love a worm." The Pokemon anime was only meant to run for around a year and a half. Due to this show's immense success, it's now one of the longest-running shows on TV. The main character, Ash Ketchum, is named Satoshi in the Japanese release. This name references Pokemon creator Satoshi Tajiri. Another character is Satoshi's rival, Shigeru, who is renamed Gary Oak in the West. Shigeru gets his name from Nintendo veteran Shigeru Miyamoto, but this reference goes a little farther. Satoshi and Shigeru were some of the default names for the player and their rival in the Japanese Pokemon games. Miyamoto was a mentor of sorts to Tajiri, and their relationship was referenced in the characters' names. In early designs, Ash looked very similar to the player character from the games. His appearance was eventually altered to differentiate the games and the TV show. According to Ash's original voice actor, Veronica Taylor, Ash was named Casey when she auditioned for the role. The name Ash may have been chosen to fit the series' tree-based naming convention. Pikachu's voice was provided by Japanese voice actress Ikue Otani, even in the show's English version.
Pikachu.
Sometimes, however, an American voice actress would take Pikachu's role if the American localizers needed additional takes.
Pikachu.
The character Brock was eventually dropped from the show. This was because the creative team feared Americans would view his appearance as a racist stereotype, mainly due to his eyes. To replace Brock and avoid any stereotyping, the team created a more European-looking character, Tracy. Tracy was replaced by Brock after the team realized nobody was offended by his appearance. Many fans wanted original characters Ash, Misty, and Brock reunited in later seasons of the anime. However, one of the show's directors, Masamitsu Hidaka, revealed that Misty would never come back as a permanent character. In an interview with PokeBeach, Hidaka stated that Misty's presence would prevent the team from continually introducing new female characters to the show. He said that switching out girls provides new eye candy for male audiences, and that girls are more customizable. They can constantly change outfits and wear things like bathing suits. The show's creators also never want to make Ash a Pokemon master. Hidaka has stated that if it ever happens, the show will end. They'll keep adding new badges to earn, new areas to explore, and new Pokemon to capture until that time comes. He also explained that after the anime's first few seasons, the show became more culturally generic due to its international success. This can be seen clearly in Best Wishes and the XY series, where the Japanese text is replaced by a custom set of symbols. This new language actually corresponds to the modern Latin alphabet and can be deciphered into either English or Romanized Japanese. Removing cultural imagery made the Pokemon world more unique and also made it easier to localize. Since the text appeared to be gibberish in every language, non-Japanese countries didn't have to bother translating it. Although the show was a hit, it's had to endure plenty of scrutiny. One of its first major controversies came after episode Electric Soldier Porygon aired on TV, hospitalizing around 700 people. The episode is said to have caused vomiting, headaches, irritated eyes, and for a small portion of the viewership, seizures. Because of this, the episode was never aired again, was banned overseas, and the entire show was put on hold for 4 months. The animation technique used is what caused the issue. In the episode, Pikachu uses an electric attack to blow up missiles. To illustrate the explosion, rapidly flashing red and blue lights consumed the screen. The incident became known as Pokemon Shock and was a disaster for the show. Fans were deeply concerned that the show would be cancelled, but Hidaka has since stated that Pokemon was never in danger of being cancelled due to its popularity. In the original season, a few significant plot holes are never explained. Ash and his friends never traveled to the Safari Zone, so it's never made apparent how he caught so many Tauros. There's a particular episode that covered all these story beats, but was also banned and never aired in America. Titled The Legend of Dratini, this episode has a man named Kaiser point a revolver at Ash and the others. This was intended for comic effect, but the episode never made it to the US due to its pervasive use of firearms. To add to the controversy, the episode contains scenes with Team Rocket's Meowth wearing a Hitler-like mustache. Interestingly, clips from this episode were used in the series' Poké-Rap segments. Another controversial episode is Beauty and the Beach, which is the first Pokemon episode to be banned in all countries outside of Asia. It was criticized for its depiction of women's breasts and contains many sexual innuendos inappropriate for children. Halfway through the episode, there's a scene where James cross-dresses wearing inflatable breasts for a beauty contest. This scene was intended to be comedic, but ended up getting the episode banned for over 3 years. America later received a heavily edited version of Beauty and the Beach, which was titled The Lost Episode. The Pokemon Jinx was another source of heavy controversy, and had to be banned from the show, then later edited. People complained the character was racist, as it resembled several offensive depictions of black people during the 20th century. Jinx's original design appeared in several American broadcasts, but future episodes had the Jinx scenes removed altogether. In one instance, an episode that featured Jinx prominently, titled The Ice Cave, wasn't aired in America at all. Jinx's design was eventually recolored purple to address the racism allegations. This was first implemented in the games, followed by the show a few years later. The show was also impacted by the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center. Despite being created years before September 2001, 2 early Pokemon episodes were taken out of circulation following the attacks. An episode titled The Tower of Terror was removed. Though no official statement was given, it's believed the episode was pulled because its name could evoke memories of the attack. The episode titled Tentacool and Tentacruel was also removed. This was due to the episode's content, which had a giant Tentacruel attacking the city. A character in the episode is also seen using an automatic weapon. Although the episode was temporarily pulled, a shot of Tentacruel striking a skyscraper wasn't cut from the show's opening. This particular episode was also pulled for a short time after the passing of Hurricane Katrina, as the episode shows the damaged city flooded. The success of the Pokemon anime led to over 20 Pokemon movies being made. One of the earliest Pokemon films, Movie 3, was originally going to be completely different. It involved a real-world T-Rex, and would question what happened to the real-world animals that once lived in the Pokemon world. Writer Shudo Takeshi wanted to introduce real animals into the world, and address questions like why are there real trees and flowers but not real animals, and what's the difference between plant Pokemon and regular plants. This would have been done with scientists discovering a T-Rex fossil. The eyes of the T-Rex fossil would start to glow, and it would come back to life, endlessly striding forward. It would be crushing everything in its path, and even makes its way to Ash's hometown. Ash, his friends, and Team Rocket would all try to stop this fossil's rampage. The dinosaur would have been stopped eventually, but Mr. Shudo never explained how. As this story was being made, no new Pokemon had been announced, and Pokemon Gold and Silver were a while away. As such, there were no new Pokemon for the movie staff to advertise, and the game staff weren't willing to make a Pokemon just for the movie. Shudo was stuck with the original 151 and the handful of Generation 2 Pokemon that had been revealed. The idea was ultimately rejected because a story where a bunch of minerals gain consciousness and come to life won't be a hit. Mr. Shudo says he went home and drowned his sorrows in alcohol after his script was rejected. A few days later, Shudo was set designs for 4 new Pokemon, including Entei and Unknown. A new film would be based around these Pokemon to advertise Gold and Silver.
Did you know? There's a lost Pokemon movie about a T-Rex fossil that comes to life and almost destroys Kanto. The movie was written by Takeshi Shudo, the chief writer of the first 2 Pokemon films, as well as the early years of the Pokemon anime. Just a few months before his death in 2010, Shudo wrote a series of entries on his blog explaining what the movie was about, what inspired him to write it, and why it was ultimately never made. We recently translated all those blog entries into English, so all the information in this video comes directly from Takeshi Shudo himself. This story begins with Shudo waking up in the hospital hooked up to an IV drip. At this point, he had already completed several seasons of the anime and thought pretty soon the series would come to an end. He even knew how it would end, but one day the director told Shudo that the anime would continue on for at least 10 more years, leading Shudo to obsess over how he could possibly make it last in perpetuity. Shudo wanted to get rid of Ash and reboot the series with a new protagonist and have the show grow up with its audience and tackle more mature themes. He drank more and more as he obsessed over these musings until eventually Shudo drank so much that he blacked out. When he woke up in the hospital, he felt completely alienated from the nurses treating him. They were all girls in their 20s, and by now Shudo had aged into a 50-year-old man. They treated him like he was ancient and that he found it impossible to have any real conversations with them. He felt depressed, alone, and worst of all to him, old. Shudo thought to another time he had blacked out and woke up in a hospital bed, back to when he was a younger man of 38. After recovering back then, he took all his nurses out for drinks and tried to romance the one he thought was the prettiest, even staying up until 4 a.m. talking to her on the phone one night. When he was younger, the nurses found him charming and thought his job as a screenwriter was exciting. He was such a heavy drinker that he found himself in the hospital on a pretty regular basis. So regular, in fact, that in the middle of the story, he offered his readers some pro tips, like to make sure you always buddy up to the head nurse so she'll direct her subordinates to give you the best care. He says one time he even attended a Pokemon script meeting with an IV needle in his arm. But now his youth was spent and those days were gone. He wrote, "They didn't treat me like a man exactly, more like an uncle. There was also an apprentice nurse who acted like I was in elder care. They were certainly kind, but it was the sort of kindness that makes you stand up and offer your seat to an old man on the train. I was in a private room staring at the ceiling on an IV drip without having any real conversations with the nurses. The question that naturally came to mind was, what is this world I live in?" This was the state he was in when he suddenly grabbed a pen and paper and started writing. The first day of a 6-month process crafting a brand new Pokemon movie, a 3rd film to follow up on the success of Pokemon the Movie 2000. The theme of the first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, was the existence of self. The second movie was coexistence, and now this 3rd movie's theme would be, what is this world I exist in? Shudo explains that real-world animals can be found in early anime episodes, but later on their existence was pretty much erased as the anime's canon changed to include just Pokemon and humans. So he wanted to reintroduce animals in the most dramatic way possible, people digging up an ancient fossil of a Tyrannosaurus. At this point in the story, Shudo suddenly disappears for 13 days. When he returns with his next blog post, he starts off saying, "I'm sorry for the sudden absence. Lately I've been struggling. Trouble sleeping, no appetite, getting sick. Then I fainted while I was on the computer. My body was on the road to recovery last year, but suddenly fell into a tailspin." Okay, let's pick up the story where we left off. Shudo continues. The discovery of the Tyrannosaurus fossil sends Kanto's scientists into an uproar as they question what it could mean for their understanding of the world they live in. He likens it to when humans in the real world found out the Earth was round, or what Charles Darwin's theory of evolution meant for human existence. He writes, "Is there some great secret to this world's very existence? With the discovery of the Tyrannosaurus fossil, people begin to wonder about the world in which they live. But there's no time to waste thinking about it because a blue light appears in the eye of the Tyrannosaurus fossil and it starts to move. It's headed somewhere. It doesn't care about the human world or the wild world of Pokemon in its path. It crosses rivers and oceans in a straight line. Anything that gets in its way is crushed. The Tyrannosaurus just keeps making a beeline for who knows where, destroying everything in its path. Eventually it reaches Pallet Town and stomps Professor Oak's lab into dust, leaving Oak just stammering, "I knew this day would come, but I don't know why it's happening. I knew this day would come." Shudo summarizes the script, saying a lot of the screen time focuses on Pokemon habitats and human dramas that are unfortunate enough to get between the fossil and its destination. To be clear, this isn't a living, breathing dinosaur, it's a fossil made of stone that for mysterious reasons suddenly became sentient. Ash and his friends, as well as Jesse, James, and Meowth, all try to stop it, along with pretty much every human and Pokemon in existence. They don't know why, but their gut instinct tells them that the Tyrannosaurus could destroy the entire world. One of Team Rocket's secret bases lies within its path of destruction, so Team Rocket joins the resistance as well, as old animosities and rivalries all fade away in the fight for existence. The only living being who remains calm is Mewtwo, who as usual is brooding and wondering about its own self-existence. Shudo says that the introduction of the Tyrannosaurus was partially motivated by the fact that Gold and Silver weren't finished yet, which meant he had to rely on the same 151 Pokemon he had already used in the first 2 movies and anime episodes. He thought maybe a new Pokemon could be made for this movie just like he had created Lugia for the previous film. But in a meeting Shudo wasn't invited to, Game Freak and the movie's producers decided that unlike the last time, the 3rd movie wouldn't get a brand new Pokemon of its own. So he wanted to add a new sort of creature and got the idea of a Tyrannosaurus from Sue, one of the largest and best preserved T-Rex specimens ever found. It was named after its discoverer, Sue Hendrickson, then auctioned off for nearly $1 billion yen shortly before Shudo started writing his script. He says he would have bid on it himself if he could, but unfortunately he didn't have $1 billion yen just sitting around. So instead of Shudo's garage, nowadays Sue can be found in the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. He also cited Shonen Kenya as inspiration, one of his favorite childhood manga. Shonen Kenya tells a story of a Japanese boy whose family moves to Africa during World War II. The British kidnap his father, so he has to go on a series of adventures to get him back, including one adventure where he gets chased by dinosaurs. Shudo poured his heart and soul into the 3rd Pokemon movie, but in the end it never got made. He said it took me 6 months after leaving the hospital to write it, but ultimately the script got rejected. The reason wasn't that it would destroy world building of Pokemon, or that it was confusing, or that it had a heavy theme. The reason they gave me was that a story where an inorganic object becomes conscious and starts moving wouldn't be a hit. I was in no mood to talk. After all, I had been working on this script for almost half a year. I went back to Odawara and drank a lot of sake. The film's director, Kunihiko Yuyama, just didn't have the confidence in Shudo's movie. Yuyama worked on a similar film a few years earlier about a car that gains consciousness and runs amok, which failed to meet financial expectations. Shudo was confident in the quality of his script, but he couldn't guarantee its success at the box office. He felt an extraordinary weight on his shoulders as he walked around Tokyo and saw countless street merchants selling Pokemon merchandise, most of it unlicensed and handmade. He figured a lot of the knockoff Pikachu dolls were probably stitched together at home by the city's poorest and most desperate residents. If the next movie flopped, the Pokemon company would take a hit, but ultimately they'd be just fine. However, it was the street vendors selling pirated goods and their families that relied on them to bring home the bacon who'd get hit the hardest. Considering the demands of his superiors as well as the plight of the pirates, Shudo reluctantly scrapped the script. In the end, Shudo would co-write a completely different script with Hideki Sonoda. Game Freak and the film's producers approved 4 Pokemon from Gold and Silver to be included in this new script, with 2 of them being Entei and Unknown. So they wrote a story around them that eventually became The Spell of the Unknown. Although she's called Molly in the English version, the Japanese movie's main character is a young girl named Mii, who Shudo named after his daughter. He said, "My daughter was born when I was 45 years old, which means that by the time she reaches adolescence, I'll be an old man. I might even be dead. So I decided to make this film a little present for my daughter." The producer and the staff didn't know anything about it. As for the ending of the Tyrannosaurus script, Shudo purposefully left it a mystery. The fossil spends most of the movie stomping in a straight line, so the big question is, where exactly has it been going this whole time? At the end of his post, Shudo tells his readers, and the place where the Tyrannosaurus fossil finally stops is, well, I don't think I'll tell you actually. He goes on to say he'll publish a small novel with more information at a later date, just as he had done for the first 2 movies. It would have been volume 3 in the animation series, books Shudo wrote with extra lore and information not seen in the movies or TV show. But tragically, he collapsed in the smoking area of a Nara railway station 8 months later and died at a hospital shortly after, so the novel was never published. His death was caused by subarachnoid hemorrhage, which is essentially a brain bleed most likely caused or at least exacerbated by a lifetime of heavy drinking and smoking. And what eventually became of Shudo's lost Pokemon movie and where it ended up after his death remains a mystery even to this day.
Did you know? The idea for Pokémon Detective Pikachu stemmed from one of the rejected pitches for the Pokémon anime. While developing the anime, the show's staff wanted to have Pokémon talk in full sentences. However, the developers of the original games, Game Freak, felt that Pokémon shouldn't speak at all. While a compromise was reached, with Team Rocket's Meowth being the only Pokémon capable of speaking the human language, many staff members still wanted to hear Pikachu talk. The original concept for the 3DS version of Detective Pikachu was simply to have a Pikachu that could talk and express various emotions. This resulted in a tech demo shown off in 2013, which included a motion-captured Pikachu that would talk to its audience. Game Freak were still reluctant to allow the team to break the rules of the series, and producer Hiroyuki Janai had to spend a lot of time convincing them that it was a good idea. Pokemon Company president Tsunekazu Ishihara was also unsure about the project. When he made an appearance on the Japanese television show Professional Shigoto no Ryugi, the show's blurb read, "This summer, Ishihara started development on a never-before-seen game. It's a new game featuring the very popular character Pikachu in a bold way. There is concern, however, that if it's bad, the long-loved character would lose popularity in the blink of an eye." Fortunately, the Detective Pikachu game was a success. In April 2016, movie studios were allowed to bid for the rights to make Pokémon movies. The franchise was in high demand in 2016, thanks to the massive success of the mobile game Pokémon Go, which saw Nintendo's stocks rise by $9 billion. The rights were eventually won by Legendary Pictures, who were bidding against Warner Bros. And Sony. Legendary winning the bid was seen as remarkable, as they're owned by the Chinese company Dalian Wanda Group. Historically, China and Japan have been bitter rivals, and some thought it was unusual for a Chinese company to be handling a prominent Japanese property. Universal Pictures were later slated to handle the film's distribution outside of Japan and China. However, on July 25, 2018, it was announced that Warner Bros. Would be distributing the film instead. This would be the first Pokémon film they distributed since Pokémon 3, the movie. Speculation arose that this change was a precursor to Legendary forming a new deal with Warner Bros. After their contract with Universal expired on December 31, 2018. Once they obtained the rights, Legendary wasted no time in fast-tracking the movie's production so they could capitalize on the Pokémon Go craze. It was decided, at the behest of the Pokémon Company, that Ash Ketchum would not be the protagonist of the new film. Ash already had a lot of backstory and character development from the animated show and movies, so the company wanted to try something new, starring a new character. Rumors began to circulate that Max Landis, who wrote 2017's Bright, would be providing the film's script. Another batch of rumors stated that Nicole Perlman of Thor and Guardians of the Galaxy fame and Gravity Falls' Alex Hirsch were in negotiations to write the film. When the movie started filming in January 2018, however, the draft was credited to Perlman and the film's director Rob Letterman, with no mention of Hirsch. Letterman was approached with the pitch for Detective Pikachu and, quote, fell in love with the story behind it. Actor Justice Smith was the first person confirmed to have a role in the movie. Interestingly, Smith's character in the film Paper Towns sang the Pokémon theme in a scene along with his co-stars Austin Abrams and Nat Wolff.
Pokémon, gotta catch 'em, it's you and me.
Speaking of music, Detective Pikachu is the second time a Nintendo product used Happy Together by the Turtles in a trailer. It was also used for the Nintendo 64 title Super Smash Bros. Another interesting audio secret comes from the 2018 Pokémon World Championships in Nashville, Tennessee. After revealing the official title for the movie on stage, Rob Letterman asked the crowd to chant as if Pikachu and Charizard were fighting in front of them. This chanting was recorded and used during the film's fight scene between the two Pokémon. The plot of the Detective Pikachu movie loosely follows the plot of the game, with the two versions having many similarities. The protagonist, Tim Goodman, and the location, Rhyme City, share their names between the two versions. Various scenes from the movie also reference other Pokémon games and properties. Alongside all the Pokémon that cameo, locations like the Sinnoh region from Pokémon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum are named. Tim's train ticket also shows that he departed from Leavin' Town, a pun on Leaving Town. The staff of the 3DS game were excited at the prospect of their work becoming a full Hollywood production, calling it a huge honor. While working on the game, the most that they'd hoped for was an animated short for Japanese television, and so they were amazed when they were told that it would be turned into a full movie. However, they were also nervous, as they had to leave creative control in the hands of Legendary Pictures. When the 3DS version of Detective Pikachu was unveiled, many fans began wondering who would voice the iconic character in English. While the role would eventually go to Kaiji Tang, fans overwhelmingly wished that actor and director Danny DeVito would take the spot. A video titled Great Detective Pikachu English trailer featuring Danny DeVito was uploaded by YouTube user TealHollow1 on January 29, 2016, a mere 3 days after the Japanese trailer launched. The video dubbed over the trailer with voice clips from DeVito's DeVito's previous roles, most notably Frank Reynolds from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. A Change.org petition asking DeVito to be cast in the role gained over 50,000 signatures before it closed. DeVito's response to the overwhelming fan demand came on the 1st of April 2016, where he was asked during a panel if he would voice Detective Pikachu in the game. His response was a firm no, followed by the question, "What the f*** is Pokemon?" However, this wasn't the end of DeVito's unwitting involvement with the property. Visual effects producer for the film, Greg Baxter, confirmed to the Nerdist that the team tested audio from DeVito's role in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia for use in the movie. While he liked the voice, it was Ryan Reynolds' voiceover that really struck a chord with the producers. Other actors considered for the role were Hugh Jackman, Mark Wahlberg, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Longtime Pikachu actress Ikue Otani voiced Pikachu's regular speech in all versions of the movie. In the German version of the initial trailer, though, Pikachu is dubbed with a different voice.
Sie kann ihn doch hören, oder?
Pika Pika.
It's unknown who this actor was or why the voice was changed for this version specifically, as it's identical in all other languages. Regardless, the voice was quickly changed, with Warner Brothers uploading a new version of the German trailer soon after. Reynolds, famous for his guerrilla marketing campaigns as Deadpool, adopted a similar tactic with Detective Pikachu. He uploaded a humorous video to his YouTube channel that parodies method acting, telling viewers how he gets into the role. Reynolds' anecdotes involve leaving his daughters at school because Detective Pikachu doesn't know who those two little girls are, and trying to lose 182 pounds in order to better fit the character. Reynolds not only voiced Pikachu, but also provided motion capture for the character. Pokémon were chosen to appear in the movie based on 3 criteria: their popularity, what the story needed, and what looked good or interesting in a live-action setting. Legendary worked closely with Game Freak and the Pokémon Company to narrow these choices down. They tried to include a good range of Pokémon from every generation, although Letterman expresses a certain fondness for the original 151. Pokémon Detective Pikachu is the first Pokémon movie to incorporate live-action elements. Artist R.J. Palmer is known for his realistic interpretations of various Pokémon, with his art having gone viral online. He began drawing Pokémon as a hobby in 2013, and this directly led to him being approached to work on Detective Pikachu. The film's production designer Googled realistic Pokémon and, after finding Palmer's art, invited him to help work on the film designing the creatures. The first trailer for Detective Pikachu gained more than 30 million views in 2 days on YouTube alone. Upon the movie's reveal, some longtime fans were skeptical about the realistic Pokémon designs, as well as the fact that Pikachu could talk. While the realistic look of the creatures was well received by some, others felt the choice was ugly, considering the series' original simple and cartoony aesthetic. Concerns about the film's popularity were set aside when test audiences responded very positively. In January 2019, 3 months before the Detective Pikachu film had even released, it came to light that Legendary were already working on a sequel. According to HollywoodReporter.com, the studios hired 22 Jump Street writer Oren Uriel to write the script. Uriel also worked on the upcoming Sonic the Hedgehog movie and Men in Black International, but has so far made no comment on his work for the next Pokémon film. Also in January, WeGotThisCovered.com uncovered that 2 new movies are also being made for the franchise. The first will be a spin-off of the Pokémon Mewtwo, which is not the upcoming film Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, and a movie adaptation of the games Pokémon Red and Blue. Legendary apparently wants to flesh out the events of the games, using live action and CGI to tell the story of Red and his journey through the Kanto region. It seems that both of these projects are set in the Detective Pikachu universe. It appears as though Legendary are launching a cinematic universe of live-action Pokémon films, with one of Detective Pikachu producers seemingly confirming it. Later in March, IGN published an article about their visit to the set of Detective Pikachu during filming in 2018. While on this visit, IGN asked producer Ali Mendez about Legendary producing more live-action Pokémon movies. Mendez seemed to imply a Pokémon cinematic universe was in the works, saying, "Pokémon is such a rich universe. There are so many ways you can go inside it. We're trying to get the first movie right, and then once we've done that, we'll see where we go from there." But absolutely. Even the Pokémon themselves, there are 800 of them. We're going to have a lot of them in Detective Pikachu, but we want to play with all of them at some point. Whatever the case, the future of Detective Pikachu seems bright. The film's opening weekend box office earnings are estimated to be up to $100 million, putting the film in line with several Marvel movies.
Did you know?
South Park has many hidden secrets within its episodes. One prime example is in the Season 3 episode, Chin Pokemon. Even the episode's title and plot were a means to sneak profanity past censors. The term Chinpoko means small penis in Japanese, and the episode's title is a mix of this phrase and the word Pokemon, effectively meaning small penis monsters. Another aspect of the episode, Mr. Hirohito and Mr. Osi's compliments towards the endowment of American men, was based on a true story. South Park creators Matt Stone and Trey Parker were visiting a friend working in Beijing and met their friend's boss. The boss kept telling Parker and Stone how small his penis was, and that Americans were lucky to be so well endowed. Another lewd secret can be found in the episode Scott Tenorman Must Die. In one scene, Tenorman's body hair is in a plastic bag. The hair is black, despite him being a redhead. This is because the team had to change the hair color to black so it wouldn't get lost against Cartman's red jacket when he held them. Another less known fact is that Matt and Trey are huge fans of video games. This includes World of Warcraft, which they've played a lot of in their free time. This is part of the reason why they wanted to create the episode Make Love, Not Warcraft. While producing the episode, the team ran into a few issues. They didn't think Warcraft creators Blizzard Entertainment would help them, so their team tried to produce video game-like visuals themselves, but struggled to do so. They eventually gave up and asked Blizzard if they could use the actual game characters. It turned out that Blizzard were excited to have anything to do with South Park, and agreed. The South Park team brought Blizzard staff to their offices, who played the game under Trey's direction to get footage for the show. Matt and Trey's love of gaming can be seen in other episodes, such as the two-parter Go God Go. The major plot point of Cartman heavily desiring a Nintendo Wii reflected Matt and Trey's own desires. For the episode Casa Bonita, Matt and Trey pulled from their own experiences as kids. The Casa Bonita in the show was almost entirely based on a location of the same name that Matt and Trey went when they were younger. The real Casa Bonita is in Lakewood, Colorado, and even has the same fake waterfall featured in the show. Another episode that has real-world connections is Man Bear Pig. Matt and Trey came up with the idea for Man Bear Pig long before the episode, but were unsure of how to use it. When Al Gore released his documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, the duo thought it would be funny to replace Gore's fixation with global warming with something ridiculous, such as Man Bear Pig. Matt and Trey were actually producing a TV series about Gore in the year 2000, which would have been based on Al Gore's presidency. The pair were almost certain Gore would be president, but had to completely change their plans when Gore lost to Bush. They ended up making That's My Bush instead, an 8-episode show about George W. Bush which aired in 2001. Stone and Parker originally bonded over their shared love of Monty Python, which they often cite as an inspiration for South Park. Parker and Stone first met in 1992 at the University of Colorado, where the two worked on a short animation called The Spirit of Christmas: Jesus vs. Frosty. The Spirit of Christmas is now considered the very first episode of the long-running animated series, and follows the first incarnations of Kyle, Kenny, Cartman, and Stan. Stone and Parker animated the short only using glue, construction paper, and an old 8mm film camera, and didn't think much of the project in the moment. After college, the two creators decided to go to Hollywood and pursue more projects. Fox Network executive and friend of Stone and Parker, Brian Graden, put the duo to work on a pilot for Time Warped, a children's TV series that was meant to be a musical. The pilot, called Rom and Jewel, was a love story about a Homo erectus and an Australopithecus, but unfortunately it never aired. Graydon still wanted to work with Stone and Parker in some way, and paid them roughly $1,200 to make a second Spirit of Christmas short as a video Christmas card. This short is now considered one of the first viral videos, and was even snuck into the game data of Tiger Woods' PGA Tour 99 on the original PlayStation, causing it to be recalled from stores. Actor George Clooney found the short so funny that he reportedly made hundreds of copies of it and sent it to friends. As a sort of thank you to Clooney, Stone and Parker cast him as Stan's dog Sparky in the episode Big Gay Owl's Big Gay Boat Ride, and gave Clooney a speaking role in South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. Because the short was such a hit, Parker and Stone got their first real chance to create a full show. Fox ultimately decided to pass on the show because of its adult content, and inclusion of characters such as a talking piece of feces. With Fox out of the picture, Stone and Parker entered negotiations with both MTV and Comedy Central. Parker was adamant that they take the show to the edgier Comedy Central, as he feared MTV would ultimately turn South Park into a children's show. After striking a deal with Comedy Central, Parker and Stone assembled a team and had 3 months to create the first episode. Cartman gets an anal probe. This episode took the longest to make out of any South Park episode, as it was made entirely out of craft paper. Every episode of South Park that followed was made on a computer with paper textures to emulate the style. Although production was going well, South Park was in serious danger of being cancelled before it even aired, as the pilot's crude humor didn't perform well with test audiences. However, the cult following around their original shorts was evident, and Comedy Central agreed to order a 6-episode run, followed by 7 more when the show performed well. Stone and Parker had huge fights with the network that year, and struggled to get Comedy Central to fully understand their humor. For the first few seasons, the team would finish working on an episode within 3 weeks. After turning in shows on Wednesday, the team would fly to Las Vegas for a night out and return to work the next day. Currently, with the help from a much larger staff, the team can complete an episode of the show within a week. Tools like CorelDRAW and Maya enable a shorter production schedule, which allows the team to react quickly to current events. Parker and Stone rarely, if ever, miss the weekly deadline, and this helps the show stay politically and socially relevant. One early example of this is the Season 4 episode, Quintuplets 2000. The episode references the United States Border Patrol's raid of a house during the Ellen Gonzalez scandal, which happened just 4 days before the episode aired. Perhaps the most famous example is the Season 12 episode, About Last Night, which is about Barack Obama becoming president in 2008. Stone, Parker, and the rest of the team managed to update and air the episode only 24 hours after Obama's victory. Stone and Parker have said several times that they actually enjoy working under tight deadlines, and may actually prefer to work like that. The duo believes stress and time management keep them on their toes, and makes for a more creative and funnier show. If they talk about an idea for too long, they'll start to hate it and second-guess themselves. Their method does have drawbacks, however. Stone and Parker once failed to air an episode on time. In October 2013, a blackout hit the South Park studio, resulting in a missed submission deadline for the first time in 17 years. The episode in question is Season 17's Goth Kids 3: Dawn of the Posters. Parker wrote on the studio's website, "It sucks to miss an air date, but after all these years of tempting fate by delivering the show last minute, I guess it was bound to happen." After being on the air for 10 seasons, Parker and Stone knew they had to change South Park and its comedy style so the show could stay relevant. There was an introduction of a more satirical element to the series in Season 10, and this was a result of Parker and Stone wanting to add a moral center to the show, rather than relying on crude and shocking humor. South Park has been part of many different controversies over the years, but Stone has insisted that he and Parker usually don't think of storylines that would make people angry. Instead, they're more concerned with telling a good story with a message behind it. There are some plot lines that Parker and Stone thought would cause a stir among certain groups, only for the episode to have little to no backlash. A perfect example is the Season 3 episode, The Brown Noise, where the boy's teacher, Mr. Garrison, tries to convince his father to molest him because he was never molested as a kid. Stone said, "Those I thought were pretty weird that no one got pissed off about, and the fact Mr. Garrison's begging for it, I thought, was messed up. But, on the other hand, it's so messed up and fantastical, who's gonna complain?" A major source of controversy for the show was the Season 5 premiere, It Hits the Fan, as it used profanity hundreds of times without being bleeped for censorship purposes. In the days after the episode's airing, Comedy Central actually received over 5,000 disapproving emails. Sometimes, when expecting a backlash, the team actually receives praise. The Tourette Association of America released a statement following the episode Le Petit Tourette, which centered around Tourette syndrome. Although the association criticized some parts of the episode, they complimented the show for being well-researched, and believed the syndrome served as a clever device to get accurate information to the public.
Did you know? The idea for Spirited Away came from creator Hayao Miyazaki wanting to make a film that 10-year-old girls could relate to. After announcing his retirement in 1997, he would often spend his vacation at a mountain cabin with his family. Accompanying them were a group of 5-year-old girls who were friends with the rest of the family. They became an unexpected source of inspiration for Miyazaki, as the girls were apathetic and quickly approaching adolescence. Miyazaki realized that there was a lack of movies about 10-year-olds, the problems they faced, and what they held most dear in their hearts. This was also considering the fact that Miyazaki's previous work, My Neighbor Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service, were aimed at toddlers and teenagers. Miyazaki read some of the girls' magazines to find out what they held dear, but quickly realized the publications only dealt with superficial things like having crushes on boys. This wouldn't do. He knew he needed to make a film that featured a complex and exciting story with a grounded and relatable main character. The movie's main protagonist is 10-year-old Chihiro, a regular human girl surrounded by eccentric and magical characters. This was a departure from Miyazaki's usual style, which often depicted witches and strange creatures as the main characters. Miyazaki elaborated, "Until now, I wish there was such a person leading characters. This time, however, I created a heroine who is an ordinary girl, someone with whom the audience can sympathize with. Someone about whom they can say, yes, it's like that. It's very important to make it plain and unexaggerated." Spirited Away, like most of Miyazaki's movies, was created without a script. They only have storyboards, which he draws and writes almost entirely by himself. Miyazaki said, "We never know where the story will go, but we just keep working on the film as it develops. It's a dangerous way to make an animation film, and I would like it to be different, but unfortunately that's the way I work, and everyone else is kind of forced to subject themselves to it." Some of the biggest challenges Miyazaki faced while making Spirited Away was shortening the plot so the film wouldn't exceed 3 hours. He also trimmed down time by keeping the amount of eye-catching cinematography to a minimum. At one point in the early stages of production, Miyazaki was frustrated with Chihiro and how she looked. He thought she was way too dull. He was relieved when he saw that Chihiro becomes a very charming and likable heroine by the end of the film. For Miyazaki, there are 2 pivotal scenes in Spirited Away that best showcase Chihiro's character development. The first scene is where she's sitting in the back of her parents' car looking very vulnerable and innocent. The other scene is all the way at the end where she's very energetic, brave, and full of life after going on such a crazy adventure. The river spirit, a character that shows up in the bathhouse looking dirty and smelling badly, is based on Miyazaki's real-life experiences. Miyazaki said, "I cleaned a river once, my local river, and there really was a bicycle. It was stuck in there. 10 of us wrapped a rope around the bars and slowly pulled it out. We really cleaned up the river and the fish came back. And that's why I added that scene, but the smell of what they dug up was really awful. Everyone had just been throwing stuff into that river over the years, so it was an absolute mess." The river spirit symbolizes the harsh negative effects that pollution leaves on nature and the difficulties of recovering from it. Spirited Away is also filled with plenty of quiet moments without any action, where Chihiro just looks into the distance while thinking. Miyazaki calls these scenes ma, meaning an interval, and believes they're an essential part of his films and movies in general. He believes you have to take a moment to relax, breathe, and build tension in your film with quieter moments. In his opinion, most filmmakers are afraid of silence. They worry about boring the audience and losing their attention. But having your film filled with constant action can quickly become tiring and ineffective. Miyazaki also has a close relationship with John Lasseter, the chief creative officer of Pixar and the man behind Toy Story. When Lasseter was a young animator at Disney, members of Studio Ghibli visited Disney to see the American process of animation, and Lasseter later visited Studio Ghibli. Miyazaki apparently hated computer animation, but Lasseter showed the short films Luxo Jr. and Red's Dream anyway. Miyazaki was pleasantly surprised, and the two became friends. This friendship led to the first international screening of Spirited Away taking place at Pixar Studios. Miyazaki wanted Lasseter to help him with the English dub, so Lasseter convinced Disney to buy the distribution rights. Disney now owns the rights to publish Studio Ghibli's films in the West, but they had to agree to some very strict conditions to acquire these rights. Disney were not allowed to alter or cut the films at all. This is something Miyazaki was very adamant about. There's even a rumor that when Miramax co-founder Harvey Weinstein was handling the US release of Princess Mononoke, Miyazaki sent him a katana in the mail along with a message saying no cuts. Miyazaki told The Guardian, "Actually, my producer did that. Although I did go to New York to meet this man, this Harvey Weinstein, and I was bombarded with this aggressive attack, all these demands for cuts. I defeated him." Even though Disney did promise not to alter the films, they still added additional dialogue. In the American version of Spirited Away, Chihiro often narrates what she sees and what's going on in the movie.
It's a bathhouse.
This isn't part of the original. While it might be apparent to a Japanese viewer that it's a bathhouse, an American viewer might not recognize it. Other than that, Pixar made sure everything else about the film stayed the same. For Lasseter, it was important that Miyazaki's vision would not be altered. Spirited Away became the highest-grossing movie in Japan, overtaking films like James Cameron's Titanic. Spirited Away still remains Studio Ghibli's most commercially successful and critically acclaimed film. In the 2003 Academy Awards, Spirited Away was nominated for Best Animated Feature, and it won. Miyazaki did not attend the ceremony, however. He revealed in 2009 that he was protesting President George W. Bush's decision to invade Iraq that year. Miyazaki said, "The reason why I wasn't here for the Academy Award was because I didn't want to visit a country that was bombing Iraq. At the time, my producer shut me up and didn't allow me to say that, but I don't see him around today." By the way, my producer also shared in that feeling. Miyazaki wouldn't come to the United States for 6 years. He eventually decided to break his boycott due to his close friendship with John Lasseter, who was helping to bring Ponyo to the US.
Did you know? Studio Ghibli co-creator Hayao Miyazaki first envisioned Princess Mononoke in the late 1970s. He would draw sketches of a princess and a beast living in the woods, but wouldn't fully explore the idea for nearly 2 decades. Production on the film began in 1994 and took just over 3 years to complete. Miyazaki was reluctant to start the project, but his producer told him that he was getting old and this might be his last chance to make an action movie. It was a grueling process for Miyazaki and his team, who crafted nearly 144,000 hand-drawn cells and computer-generated images for the movie, and that's not counting the cells that weren't used. Though he never actually counted how many he drew, it's estimated that Miyazaki worked on about 80,000 of them himself, and he admits to overseeing the creation of practically every cell and image. Models of characters were posted on bulletin boards within the animation department of the studio. This gave artists a reference point and made sure that the film's visuals were consistent. Everything was meticulously designed. Even the arrows had models for artists to follow. Though most of Princess Mononoke was drawn with traditional pen, pencil, and paint, approximately 10% of the film contains digital imagery. Miyazaki made sure to never exceed that percentage, mainly due to his own preferences and the traditional roots of the studio. However, Miyazaki knew that he had to take advantage of the new technology. Computer-generated imagery would only ever complement the traditional animation and help to achieve a live-action feel. This resulted in Princess Mononoke looking and feeling a lot more fluid than other animated films of the time. Miyazaki took his ideas from the late 70s and made an illustrated book that became the basis for Princess Mononoke. However, concepts from the book would also make their way into other Ghibli films such as My Neighbor Totoro. So when the team went back to work on Princess Mononoke with the intention of adapting it to film, they found it to be full of worn concepts and extremely outdated. This draft was ditched and the team started anew, taking only a few elements from the original. Miyazaki initially struggled with the character of Jiko Bo and wanted Jiko to have several different occupations. Miyazaki said that he made the character of Jiko Bo without knowing what kind of role he would play. He could be a spy, a henchman of some religious group, or a ninja, or he could actually be a very good guy. In the end, he became a character who has all of those elements. Miyazaki always wanted the film's main character, Ashitaka, to be far from a typical hero. He was meant to be someone who fights a lonely war and almost never gets thanked for his actions. The original story had samurais fighting against peasants, which deterred Miyazaki. He later elaborated, saying, "A typical top-knot-haired samurai character swinging a sword, just the thought of it discourages me. There's nothing new or moving in there." The project was met with many changes and challenges, but things finally started to take shape when the studio took a trip looking for inspiration. They visited the ancient forests of Yakushima and the mountains of Shirakami-Shangshi in northern Honshu. These forests were significant, as they influenced the setting of one of Miyazaki's earlier films, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Though Princess Mononoke was progressing well, the storyboards for its ending were only finished mere months before the Japanese premiere. This was mainly due to Miyazaki famously making films without a script and creating storyboards on the fly. The film serves as an allegory for man's reckless consumption of the natural world, but Miyazaki worried that this pro-green message would make the film seem boring. Though he was concerned, Miyazaki overcame his worries and even found time to pay tribute to his favorite directors. He did this with a tight-knit frontier town known as Iron Town, which closely resembles the settlement of Tombstone from John Ford's classic film My Darling Clementine. Miyazaki made the townsfolk a group of outcasts and oppressed minorities, something that didn't typically appear in Japanese movies. Iron Town is also based on Okuizimo, Japan. The town of Okuizimo was an early adopter of Tatara furnace iron making, the same kind featured in Princess Mononoke.
Iron makers in ancient Japan also worshipped Kanayago, the goddess of Tatara, who was sometimes illustrated riding a fox, reminiscent of San riding a wolf.
Miyazaki drew heavily from Japanese and Western folklore while creating his own myths and legends. San draws inspiration from the story of Remus and Romulus, the founders of Rome who were raised by a wolf and a woodpecker. Some other notable inspirations are the novel Kim by Rudyard Kipling and the film The Wild Child by François Truffaut, where a young boy is found in the wilderness. Adapting the film into English was a difficult process. It took an incredible amount of effort to get right, partly due to its lengthy 134-minute runtime. Director Quentin Tarantino was originally offered to oversee the film's localization into English. However, Tarantino said the producer should contact fantasy author Neil Gaiman instead. Gaiman decided to fully immerse himself in Miyazaki's creation, even going as far as to research mythological creatures and settings. Gaiman said, "I found myself reading piles of books with titles like The History of Japanese Folklore. I wanted to try to understand where these characters, many of which are really from Miyazaki's imagination but are inspired by the essence of Japanese mythology, came from." Once he completed his research, Gaiman vowed to make the film come alive for American audiences and not come across as a dubbed-over movie. Gaiman knew he had to nail each of the characters' voices and stay true to their personalities. For example, Ashitaka talks in a very formal way without using any slang, while Jigo is very crude. In the original Japanese version of the film, Jigo is very rude and blunt, which is shown by him saying a bowl of soup tastes like water, a comment which may seem fairly tame to Westerners but would be hugely insulting in Japan. In the English version, Jigo instead says that the soup tastes like donkey piss, to show how outspoken he is. Most of the American cast signed onto the project because of how much they loved the original Japanese movie. Claire Danes, who voiced Princess Mononoke, jumped at the opportunity to play a strong female character and was captivated by Miyazaki's vision. Danes was also surprised at how much effort it took to voice an animated character, especially considering that this was her first time doing so. She later said, "It was surprisingly emotional for me. I came in thinking it would be very simple and it turned out to be a very intense and moving experience." Danes naturally played off Gillian Anderson, who portrayed Mononoke's wolf mother Moro. Interestingly, however, the two never worked together in person. The film's budget was massive for an animated feature, costing around $23.5 million to make, but luckily it made back almost 7 times that amount during its theatrical run. It also won several prizes, including Best Picture at the 1997 Japanese Academy Awards. Miyazaki went into retirement after directing the film, and even claimed that Princess Mononoke would be his last project in the industry. During this retirement, Miyazaki would take a vacation with his family, friends, his friend's young daughter, and her friends, where he would find the inspiration for his next creation, Spirited Away, which would pull him out of retirement.
Did you know? The idea to make Howl's Moving Castle came from Hayao Miyazaki reading British fantasy writer Diana Wynne Jones's novel of the same name. Jones's first encounter with Miyazaki was rather strange to her. Jones became a huge fan of Miyazaki's work after viewing a pirated version of Laputa, Castle in the Sky, at a science fiction convention. Jones said, "I was absolutely hit midships, to the extent of watching the film whenever it was showing. It was the most amazing thing when nearly 20 years later I got these overtures saying Miyazaki would like to make a film of Howl." Originally, Miyazaki wasn't even planned to direct the film. Studio Ghibli hired Mamoru Hosoda of Toei Animation to direct, but Hosoda left the project after his ideas were rejected. Miyazaki was attempting to retire from directing movies at the time, but took over the project after Hosoda's departure. Miyazaki has attempted to retire multiple times, but always ends up returning to animation. When asked about this regular change of heart, Miyazaki said, Although I've thought about leaving the world of animation many times, whenever I see a piece of work that I really like, I naturally want to express it in my own ideas. When I hand it to others, I always think about how this and that should be done. At last, I feel that it will be better if I take up the work myself. When production first started, Studio Ghibli planned to visit Wales, which was the setting of the book. However, Diana Jones didn't believe Studio Ghibli would gain much from seeing Welsh cities. She recalled, "I tried to dissuade them from going to Cardiff, and suggested that a smaller Welsh town would be better." Ultimately, though, Miyazaki and his art department drew most of their imagery from the French region of Alsace. Miyazaki personally visited the Alsatian towns of Colmar and Requia and studied both their traditional architecture and rural surroundings. In order to enhance the French flavor of the film's setting, the team also studied the works of French illustrator and novelist Albert Rabida. Rabida's work was ideal, as it dealt with the steampunk-style future technology seen in the film. Though the movie was mostly produced digitally, the backgrounds and characters were drawn and painted by hand before being digitized and scanned into computers. Like both Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away, Howl uses a number of digital tools and techniques to enhance the traditional art. This includes 3D rendering, ray tracing, and all kinds of morphing, visual, and atmospheric effects. These effects were put to good use when creating Sophie's physiological transformations. The way Miyazaki depicted Sophie's age-related traits evolved gradually. He carefully considered the diverse opinions of his younger staff. Producer Toshio Suzuki explains, Miyazaki wasn't sure whether it was okay for a popular entertainment movie to have a 90-year-old woman at its center from beginning to end. So he would bring it up at a meeting and a female staff member would respond by saying, "What's wrong with having a grandma as a heroine? I think it's a great idea." And then another female staffer would say, "It might be nice to see her back in a girl's body every now and then." 18 months after licensing her characters to Ghibli, Jones was told that Miyazaki would be visiting her in Bristol, England for a special screening of the film. In the end, Jones was more than satisfied with how the movie turned out, saying, "It was wonderful. I don't think I've ever met anyone before who thinks like I do. He saw my books from the inside out." This was also comforting to Jones, as she originally worried that the deal would be selling some of the characters into slavery. Jones's creation was in the good hands of Miyazaki, however, who found her world fascinating. Miyazaki was drawn to the idea of making a movie that centered on a giant castle roaming the countryside. Since Jones's novel never explained how the castle was able to move, Miyazaki spent a considerable amount of time coming up with an interesting way to make it mobile. Miyazaki may have turned to Baba Yaga's hut for inspiration, as the castle ended up with spindly-looking chicken legs. The castle's design was ultimately made more fluid and constantly changes its appearance in response to Howl and the situations he finds himself in. The castle in the book was visibly different, and was depicted as an ominous, dark, tall wizard's tower. There are many other noteworthy differences between the movie and the novel. The book has a much larger cast of characters and a range of plot threads that were too complex to include in a 2-hour film. As a result, an important character from the novel, Sophie's younger sister Martha, is absent from the movie. However, the film does have a few sly references to Martha for book readers. A farmer says that Sophie was looking for her younger sister, and in the beginning of the movie, the hat shop workers say that Howl tore out the heart of a girl named Martha. The book's main antagonist is the Witch of the Waste, but in the film, she isn't portrayed as truly evil or good. Madame Sullivan treads slightly closer to being a traditional villain in the movie, and constantly creates conflict. It's only at the end of the film that Sullivan recognizes the futility and destruction of conflict and the ongoing war, which is the film's real villain. The war is possibly the biggest difference between the book and the film, as the book only alludes to an upcoming conflict. This strong focus on the impact and consequences of war was due to Miyazaki's distaste for the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Because of the political climate and the film's strong anti-war message, Miyazaki expected Howl to be poorly received in the US. But Miyazaki was wrong. Howl's Moving Castle was critically acclaimed and broke records. At the time of its release, the film had the most extensive theatrical debut ever for a Japanese film in the United States, being screened simultaneously in 450 cinemas. Like other Ghibli films, the process of creating an English dub was handled by Disney. Pixar's John Lasseter had previously become friends with Miyazaki due to their shared love of animation, and helped Disney acquire the rights to localize Studio Ghibli's films for the West. Lasseter had previously worked with Billy Crystal on Monsters, Inc., and to get the best performance possible, Lasseter was brought in to direct Crystal during his performance as the fire demon Calcifer. Since Lasseter was in California and Crystal was in New York, the direction was unconventionally done via video conference. Crystal spoke about the difficulties of voicing a film where the visuals were set in stone compared to a movie that was still a work in progress. With Monsters, Inc., we created it as we went, and I would lay down the voice and they would animate to that. That gave me much more of a chance to improvise. So that was the challenge in doing this, and to just get it close to being right. Making the dialogue organic was the biggest challenge for Disney's team. Translators had to take the original Japanese text and turn it into something conversational while still maintaining its original meaning. A direct translation of dialogue into English might be much longer or shorter than how the words are spoken in Japanese. Sometimes this can be fixed by the actors reading the lines at a quicker or slower pace, though occasionally this isn't enough, and the dialogue has to be reworked on the fly as the actors are recording lines. It's not only the pacing that Disney needed to worry about, they also need to make sure that the English words sync up to the mouth movements on screen. One example of this issue can be seen with the name Howl. Howl is just one syllable in English, but 2 syllables in Japanese as hauru. This often leads to words being changed or added to fit, or actors having to speak in a very specific way. Did you know? Even though the One Punch Man anime didn't broadcast until 2015 in Japan, its story was publicly available ever since 2009. The series debuted as a webcomic and quickly became a hit, gaining nearly 8 million hits by 2012. Surprisingly, One Punch Man's creator, who goes by the name One, almost abandoned the series in 2010. One decided to take a break from the comic and get a real job. This hiatus lasted for nearly a year, ending in 2011. One publicly tweeted that he was quitting his job and was swiftly contacted by various potential employers and collaborators. One of them was manga artist Yusuke Murata, who offered to redraw the comic and have it published through Japan's Young Jump webcomics. Though the original webcomic was well received, One believed that Murata greatly improved it. One said, "I had always been a fan of Murata, so I jumped at the opportunity to work with him. I get really excited seeing my work transformed into something with so much passion and amazing art." One believes the show's origin as a webcomic helped it become a hit. He elaborated saying, "For creators, the appeal lies in the lack of restrictions. You can draw manga that you wouldn't be able to draw in a commercial publication. There's nobody to stop you, so you're free. This all ties into what I guess you could call a sense of crudeness and lack of polish, an amateurishness which for some reason gives webcomics a unique charm." The comic's initial success was partly due to its unpolished art style, and especially how Saitama was drawn. The more eccentric he drew the characters, the more views One would receive. Regarding why Saitama looks the way he does, including his bald head, One says he focused more on Saitama's personality than his appearance. "The world is full of cool-looking heroes, so I didn't think that was something I wanted to write about. Plus, I believe that a hero's coolness comes from their spirit and not their looks. I don't think how a hero looks is that important." Murata struggled with this philosophy while adapting One's work. Murata said, "I actually started off drawing Saitama really cool looking. I was thinking that if I was working as the artist, I should make everyone look as cool as possible. In that process, I was making Saitama look handsome or adding stars in his eyes, but I scrapped all of it. In the end, those things don't matter to Saitama's nature. His appeal isn't in his looks, so I thought that if I didn't stick to One's original design, Saitama would end up a completely different character." It was important for Murata and One to capture that everyday man feel with Saitama, so readers can easily relate to him. At first, it was hard to make Saitama relatable while also being near indestructible. If he has no physical flaws and can beat anyone he wants, Saitama could quickly become boring. But his flaws as a human being and his eccentric physical features are what made the character work. On top of the foundations laid by One and Murata, several other artists are responsible for the anime's striking visuals. The show's director, Shingo Natsume, injected some of his own flair and hired several young animators to work alongside him. The show heavily uses digital animation, which stems from Natsume's collaboration with web generation animators. Web generation is a term used to describe artists who would upload animations online for fun before becoming professional animators. These animators are used to making short, action-packed animations that are easily viewed and shared online. Natsume gave them free rein to create bombastic action sequences, which played into the strengths of the animators. Fans were instantly impressed with the show's production values and assumed the show's budget was sizable. This, however, wasn't the case. Animation director Chikashi Kubota confessed on Twitter that the show's budget was nothing special and that its impressive visuals were a product of the animators' collective passion. One Punch Man is known as Wanpan Man in Japan. This name is actually a reference to a Japanese superhero named Anpan Man, a character that creator One grew up with and watched as a child. Anpan Man got his name from his head resembling Japanese anpan sweet rolls, a trait that was mimicked in Saitama's design. Saitama's hero costume is also based on Anpan Man's costume, only with the colors of the gloves, boots, and jumpsuit reversed. Saitama's name is derived from the Japanese city of Saitama. This is the city where One was raised and first started drawing the series. The world supercontinent in One Punch Man also seems to be based on the Saitama prefecture and is the exact same shape. Interestingly, Saitama's home is based on a real location as well. While creating backdrops for the series, artists often reference real environments. And in the case of Saitama's apartment, the outside is based on a building in the Setagaya district of Tokyo, near the Meidaime train station. As well as Anpan Man, One Punch Man references several other franchises. Vaccine Man strongly resembles Piccolo from the Dragon Ball series. His antennas and purple color scheme also resemble Bikin Man, the main antagonist of the Ant Man books and anime. In the English dub, Vaccine Man is voiced by Chris Sabat. Sabat is also known for voicing Piccolo, furthering this connection.
You're a fast one. I can feel a significant increase in your power level.
In the Japanese dub, Vaccine Man is voiced by Ryusei Nakao, who notably voiced Frieza in the Japanese dub of Dragon Ball Z.
その適当な設まったく人をイライラさせるのがうまいやつらだ。
Interestingly, Nakao also voiced Bikin Man, strengthening the connection to Ant Man.
なんだこんな役立たずのツボなんか。
The show has another reference to Ant Man in the A-class hero Smile Man. Smile Man's costume is very similar to Ant Man's and even has a smiley face on his chest. Did you know? Demon King Piccolo, the first truly evil villain in the Dragon Ball series, was inspired by the Roman Emperor Nero. Accounts of Nero's rule suggest he was a psychopath and a tyrant. He was even rumored to have Christians dipped in oil and set on fire to light his garden at night. While developing the character of King Piccolo, then editor of the Dragon Ball manga Kazuhiko Torishima worked with creator Akira Toriyama over the phone. He wanted Toriyama to give Goku a challenging enemy unlike anything he faced before, someone insane who delighted in the pain of others around him. Cheekily, Toriyama also based King Piccolo on Kazuhiko Torishima himself. Years later, Torishima stated in an interview, "You can tell who was the editor at the time by the enemy characters. After you'd been doing it a while, you'd appear as an enemy." Frieza is another villain that was inspired by one of Dragon Ball's editors. In an interview from Volume 1 of Shenlong Times, a bonus pamphlet from the Daizenshu Japanese guidebooks, some of the publishing staff speculated that Frieza was based on Toriyama's second editor, Yu Kondo. However, Toriyama has never admitted this publicly, and Kondo prefers to believe he was the inspiration for Trunks. When asked about the development of Frieza as a character, Toriyama stated that he vaguely recalls basing Frieza on an evil queen from a movie. The concept of Frieza being a corrupt planet broker was inspired by real estate speculators active during Japan's 1986 economic bubble. Toriyama had contempt for people in the profession, calling them the worst people of all. Majin Buu is another villain thought to be based on one of Toriyama's editors, this time the Dragon Ball manga's final editor, Fuyuto Takeda. Toriyama's first impression of Takeda was that the man was overweight. In an interview for the guidebook Dragon Ball Forever, the author denied consciously using his editors as inspiration for villains, but he admitted that he might have done so subconsciously. Toriyama has acknowledged pulling inspiration for at least one villain from his life. The design for the god of destruction Beerus was based on his family cat, which is of the Cornish Rex breed.
Wait, that's Beerus? He looks like a big hairless house cat.
The 14-year-old cat became seriously ill, and Toriyama's family were told it didn't have long to live. The cat miraculously survived, however, with the vet joking it could be some kind of demon. Various locations in Dragon Ball have real-world influences as well. The tall, thin mountains in the background of Goku's country home, Mount Paozu, are inspired by the world-famous mountains of China, like the Tianzi Mountains. Papaya Island, the location of the World Martial Arts Tournament, is based on the real-world Indonesian island of Bali. Toriyama and his assistant went on vacation to the island with their wives. The trip left such an impression on the author that he even drew his tour guide in a panel of the manga. Whenever the Dragon Ball story returned to Papaya Island, Toriyama would pull out photographs from their trip as reference material. At one point during production, an assistant complained about having to draw so many detailed statues every week. In response, Toriyama decided to have Goku destroy the statues during the fight, making the scenes easier to draw. Editor Kazuhiko Torishima once called Toriyama a master of cutting corners. In the same interview, Torishima revealed that the Super Saiyan transformation was also an example of Toriyama cutting corners. The reason Super Saiyan hair turns bright gold was simply because Toriyama and his assistant grew tired of coloring in Goku's normal black hair. They decided that making the hair bright would allow them to draw the outline without having to fill it in.
I am the Super Saiyan, Son Goku!
The blue hair of the Super Saiyan Blue form in Resurrection F and Dragon Ball Super is supposed to be symbolic. The color is meant to demonstrate the level of tranquility Goku and Vegeta attained in their training with Beerus. Interestingly, Toriyama once considered blue hair for the Super Saiyan God form first seen in Battle of Gods. He decided against blue at that time as he thought red looked stronger. Even before that, however, the Super Saiyan God transformation looked completely different. The initial design was created by Battle of Gods animation supervisor Tadayoshi Yamamuro. He described his take as built and sturdy with a cape, but the idea was thrown out by Akira Toriyama. The creator replaced it with the smaller and less flashy design because he didn't like the idea of Goku growing more macho. This wasn't the first time Toriyama was unsatisfied with the anime staff taking liberties with his characters. In a 1997 interview with Wired, Toriyama mentioned he disliked how the anime would occasionally deviate from the manga and portray Goku as a righteous hero-type character. The author originally envisioned Goku as someone who fought primarily for his own selfish reasons, and he had trouble communicating this concept to the anime staff. Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, and Dragon Ball GT were animated by hand and released on a weekly basis. This is the reason for the animated version's infamous problems with pacing. It was simply because the original manga was being made at the same time as the show. At the beginning of the anime, the manga had been under development for over a year, with 63 chapters completed. A single episode could cover up to 3 chapters of the manga without any problems, but this brisk pace slowed down as the anime began to catch up with the manga. The series hit its shortest chapter gap during the fight between Goku and Frieza, where the manga was a mere 10 chapters ahead of the anime. To stall for time, the anime only covered a single chapter per episode, meaning approximately 14 pages had to be stretched out to fill a 22-minute time slot. This practice resulted in instances of reused animation, extended fight sequences, and more than a few inconsistencies. The most famous example being the moment Frieza claimed Namek will explode in 5 minutes, only to continue battling Goku for 9 more episodes before it finally happened. The weekly broadcast schedule is also the reason why the visual style would change from episode to episode. Up to 12 different animation studios worked on different episodes simultaneously throughout the series. Some studios had large budgets and experienced animators, which resulted in high-quality episodes, but other studios were not as fortunate, resulting in episodes that looked remarkably worse by comparison. The team responsible for the infamous pointed angular drawing style, Studio Live, animated nearly 1 in every 6 episodes of the series. This meant the low-quality animation was much more common than the high-quality animation. Akira Toriyama did not actively participate in the development of any animated release of Dragon Ball until the recent Dragon Ball Z films and the television series Dragon Ball Super. The first of these films, Battle of Gods, was rewritten almost entirely by Toriyama after he received a draft of the script. Many fans suggest that the 2009 Hollywood live-action adaptation Dragon Ball Evolution may have been the cause of Toriyama's renewed interest. A few years after Dragon Ball Evolution, some comments suggested Toriyama was annoyed by the American film and that Evolution didn't live up to his expectations. Toriyama stated, "I had put Dragon Ball behind me, but seeing how much that live-action film ticked me off and how I revised that script for the anime movie, I suppose somewhere along the line it's become a series I like too much to ever leave alone."
There's been a fair amount of Nintendo TV shows throughout the years, and even a few movies like the Super Mario Bros. Live-action film, as well as the animated Animal Crossing film from 2006. But for every show or film that actually released, there's a project that got scrapped. In this video, we'll be talking about a few of the more interesting and unique lost Nintendo shows and movies, with the first project being a modern take on their classic fantasy franchise. In 2015, the Wall Street Journal reported that a new show based on the Legend of Zelda franchise was in the works at Netflix, with Nintendo reportedly working closely alongside Netflix to bring Hyrule to life. At the time of the Wall Street Journal's article, the show was said to be in its early stages of development, with Netflix seeking writers to start work on the project. As an indication of what the final project might look like, the show was apparently described as a Game of Thrones but for family audiences. This rumor seemed a bit unrealistic to some, as Nintendo has historically been very protective of their intellectual properties being used for TV and film. As such, several outlets tried to get confirmation on the rumor. The Wall Street Journal reached out to both Nintendo and Netflix, with a Netflix spokeswoman declining to comment, and a Nintendo spokesperson simply saying that they don't comment on rumors and speculation. Just over a month after the rumor broke, Time.com got the chance to ask then Nintendo president Satoru Iwata about the rumor. Iwata responded by saying, "As of now, I have nothing new to share with you in regard to the use of our IPs for any TV shows or films, but I can at least confirm that the article in question is not based on correct information." Iwata's comments didn't seem to outright refute the rumors, which to some looked like confirmation that something was actually happening behind the scenes with Nintendo and Netflix. Despite there being some optimism, nothing came of the rumor for quite some time. 6 years after the original article, the project was finally confirmed to be real by comedian and writer Adam Conover, who's worked on several Netflix projects. But the confirmation came with some bad news that the project had been outright canceled by Nintendo. Conover appeared as a guest on the Surf Times podcast and dropped a bombshell 40 minutes into the video. Not only did Nintendo scrap the Zelda show, but they also canceled the stop-motion Star Fox series that was also in the works at Netflix. Conover lamented, "Suddenly there were reports Netflix wasn't going to do its Legend of Zelda anymore. I was like, what happened? And then I heard from my boss we weren't doing our Star Fox anymore. I was like, what happened? He was like, someone at Netflix leaked the Legend of Zelda thing. They weren't supposed to talk about it, and Nintendo freaked out and they pulled the plug on everything, the entire program to adapt these things." This Star Fox series was going to be produced by College Humor with direct input from Star Fox creator Shigeru Miyamoto. The show's visual style would have been based on Wes Anderson's stop-motion adaptation of Roald Dahl's Fantastic Mr. Fox. This came about after College Humor made a 2011 parody short titled Fantastic Mr. Star Fox that parodied both Star Fox and the Fantastic Mr. Fox film. It's clear that a lot of love went into the short, with College Humor being able to not only understand the Star Fox world, but faithfully recreate the animation style of Wes Anderson. And it clearly impressed Nintendo enough for them to give the green light to adapt an entire series. However, according to Conover, the project was short-lived and was unfortunately cancelled along with the live-action Zelda series. There's been no official word on whether Nintendo actually pulled the plug on these shows due to a leak, but it does roughly line up with their past behavior. In September 2017, the Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga 3DS remake leaked online several weeks ahead of its official launch due to an online influencer. In response, Nintendo heavily scaled back the amount of outlets and influencers who were given early copies of Nintendo games to review. Yeah, that would really suck for anyone who that happened to. The general consensus at the time was that this was an overreaction by Nintendo, as not only did Nintendo know exactly who leaked their game, but their retaliation disproportionately affected small reviewers and websites that had nothing to do with the leak. Likewise, the Netflix projects being cancelled seemed like an overreaction to the crews making the shows. After all, if all the leak did was confirm that the project existed, it's hardly a major spoiler. However, to give some credit to Nintendo, if the leak did come from a source at Netflix, it's understandable that they might want to distance themselves from a company they feel has shown unprofessional behavior and is incapable of protecting sensitive information. But some projects we're covering didn't even make it this far into production. In 2013, news broke that a few years earlier, a fairly established animation studio attempted to get approval to produce a CG Zelda film. The pitch in question was put forward by Imagi Animation Studios, who might sound familiar to you if you're a fan of TMNT. Although the studio was formed in 2000, Imagi's first major project wasn't until 2007 with TMNT, which they produced themselves over the course of 2 years. And it seems that after TMNT, Imagi jumped straight into this Zelda pitch, which was produced in early 2007. It was supervised and edited by Imagi animator Adam Holmes, who is actually the reason anyone knows about this pitch in the first place. Holmes posted the pitch video to his portfolio website for all to see. In the pitch, Zelda is hunted down and ambushed by Ganon's forces. This leads to Link saving her from Ganon's grunts, but results in Ganon confronting them directly himself. Unfortunately, the video ends before the confrontation. Despite the quality of the animation and Imagi demonstrating at least a basic understanding and admiration for the franchise, the pitch was turned down by Nintendo. Instead, Imagi would end up working on the 2009 Astro Boy movie based on the popular manga of the same name. But unfortunately, Astro Boy had a disappointing performance at the box office, reportedly only making $42 million despite having a budget of $65 million. We'd like to say that Imagi's luck changed after Astro Boy, but this was followed by several more cancelled projects, and the studio hasn't released a movie since. And Imagi isn't alone, another CG Nintendo movie pitch was turned down. On November 24th, 2014, there was a very high-profile cyber attack on Sony Pictures by a hacking group calling itself Guardians of Peace. This group leaked private information stored on Sony's servers, which included the personal info of employees such as their private emails. This data leak included emails from film producer Avi Arad, who you might know as the guy who is currently working to adapt Uncharted and Metal Gear Solid onto the silver screen. But this isn't all Arad was working on. In the leaked emails, it was revealed that he was negotiating with Nintendo to have Sony Pictures produce a Super Mario Bros. Movie. One email even showed pictures of Arad with Miyamoto and Satoru Iwata confirming that some sort of in-person discussion took place. Amy Pascal, another film producer, had even forwarded one of the emails to somebody else at Sony, adding, "Avi closed Mario Bros." Arad would later deny that any deal on Super Mario Bros. Had been finalized. Whatever the situation was behind the scenes, it clearly wasn't good for Sony. In 2018, Nintendo officially announced that Illumination Entertainment would be producing a CG Super Mario Bros. Film and not Sony. In fact, Illumination is owned by Universal Studios, who are one of Sony Pictures' biggest rivals, which must have stung. Interestingly, Shigeru Miyamoto was introduced to Illumination via Universal Parks and Resorts, who'd been working with Nintendo to make the Super Nintendo World theme parks. Miyamoto told VentureBeat that he'd been interested in doing an animated Mario film for some time, but wanted to make sure he did it with the right company, and eventually found Illumination through Universal. Similarly, Illumination were looking for the perfect project too. CEO Chris Melandari even told Variety he was glad that the 1993 Mario film flopped, and that it failed because the team making it didn't embrace or involve Nintendo enough, a mistake he suggested they wouldn't repeat. And this isn't the only animated Super Mario Bros. Film that was scrapped. In April 1989, an issue of the Los Angeles Times reported that DYKG Entertainment would be producing a full-length feature film based on Nintendo's Super Mario Bros. Video game series. This was apparently planned for a 1990 release and would be produced alongside the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. This time frame lines quite well with the other reports of an animated Mario movie. One example comes from a 1990 issue of TV Guide, with the magazine listing several upcoming animated features, including a Super Mario Bros. Movie set to release in the summer of 1991. Another report can be found in David Sheff's Game Over: How Nintendo Conquered the World, which seemed to confirm the TV Guide. There was another feature movie in the works too, an animated movie similar to, but hopefully better than, the TV cartoons. The time frame of these statements seem to suggest that there was once an animated movie planned by DYKG. However, talks must have broken down or developed over time, leading to the production of a live-action Mario movie instead.
Did you know? The first two Sonic cartoons debuted only days apart. The first cartoon, Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, launched on September 6, 1993. The second, simply titled Sonic the Hedgehog, debuted on September 18th, the same year, just 12 days after. It's unclear why the two shows ran concurrently. A popular explanation is that after acquiring the license, DYKG Entertainment presented ABC with a pitch for Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. ABC liked the idea, but were looking for a show with a different tone. Rather than letting their hard work go to waste, DYKG continued to work on the show for syndication while simultaneously revising their pitch for ABC. The revised pitch was accepted and went on to become Sonic the Hedgehog. Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog would run on weekdays, while Sonic the Hedgehog ran on Saturday mornings. To avoid confusion between the two, the latter show is often referred to by the nickname Sat-Am, a contraction of Saturday AM. Even members of the show's staff would refer to it by this nickname. Despite the frequent confusion and comparison between the two shows, there was never any rivalry between the two teams behind them. They were kept entirely separate and were too busy to foster competition. When DYKG were pitching the cartoon to ABC, they decided to cast Jaleel White as Sonic. The casting was a political choice intended to strengthen the pitch. White was already an ABC personality, starring as Steve Urkel on Family Matters. White was rarely able to attend group recordings due to his busy schedule, juggling school, Family Matters, and Sonic, and required his own recording sessions. An advantage to this was that White had more time dedicated to him, and could re-record lines to get them perfect. White also wanted to avoid a delivery that would associate Sonic with any one race or subculture. The final episode of Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog was a special titled Sonic Christmas Blast, which was released in November 1996, almost 3 years after the series finale. Further adding to the confusion between the two cartoons, this episode also contains Sally Acorn from Sat-Am. The episode's title is styled after the logo for Sonic 3D Blast, which was released in November 1996. Issue number 41 of Archie's Sonic comics referred to the special as Extremely Sonic Christmas, suggesting the episode was meant to promote the game Sonic Extreme before it was cancelled. In December of 1993, a promotional tie-in called Sonic the Poster Mag was released in the UK. The magazine promoted both Sonic cartoons, which were soon to be airing in the UK. And while it explained the differences between each show, the licensed material was muddled, mixing up characters and titles from the two different shows. The previews in the magazine appeared to be taken from a version of Sat-Am still in production. Sat-Am's characters were entirely different, with Tails missing and only Sonic and Princess Sally Acorn from the final show. A guide was made for the show referred to as the Sat-Am Bible. The guide was written by TV veteran Len Jensen, who envisioned a dramatic, emotionally charged series. Robotnik and Snively's backstories from the Bible describe them as astronauts from the 23rd century who escaped from their colony following a failed takeover bid. In a twist reminiscent of Planet of the Apes, there's a freak accident with faster-than-light travel, and they return to Earth thousands of years in the future. Humanity had long since been wiped out, and the Earth was repopulated by animals, who had renamed the planet Mobius. It's heavily implied in 1996's Sonic the Hedgehog the movie that Planet Freedom is also a post-apocalyptic Earth. A ruined city in the Land of Darkness bears a strong resemblance to New York, and is described as ancient relics by the characters. Additionally, a very similar backstory was used by Archie Comics in 2003, with issue number 124 revealing that Mobius was a future Earth that had been gene-bombed by the alien Zorda. This wouldn't have been the first time Archie took unused ideas from the show. The character Nate Morgan was actually a scrapped idea from early in Sat-Am's production. Despite the passion of the team, Sat-Am encountered problems from day one. The show was on the opposite side of the wildly popular Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and was frequently rescheduled to make way for sports programming. The show was cancelled after season 2, ending on a cliffhanger. Writer Ben Hurst made many attempts to renew interest in the show. At one point, he was able to consult with a Sega executive, with whom he had a most pleasant conversation with. According to Hurst, the pair separated on good terms with the intent to meet again and discuss a potential conclusion to the series. The next day, Hurst was contacted by Archie writer Ken Penders, and the pair discussed his plans. However, Hearst recalled that when he called the Sega executive back, she tore into him, telling him people pay us to develop the Sonic product, we don't pay them, before hanging up. Hearst speculated that Penders had relayed his plans to Sega poorly, thwarting their chances. Hearst was involved with a third Sonic show though, Sonic Underground. He claimed that DYKG wanted the series to be centered around music so they could collect extra residuals. Essentially because the songwriters would sign over the rights to their songs, DYKG could collect extra money and royalties every time the song was re-aired. Many of the writers on the show were inexperienced, and several had difficulty keeping up with the breakneck speed of production. DYKG actually wanted to run 2 episodes a week to maximize profit. This also made it difficult for writers to create overarching plots. Sonic Underground unexpectedly resurfaced in 2012, when Archie Comics announced they'd be publishing an epilogue to the series in issue 50 of Sonic Universe. However, the comic failed to surface. Archie was forbidden from using material from Sonic Underground, and it seems this rule was enforced more strictly than they were anticipating. While the games were set on Earth, the pilot for Sonic X showed the characters in a world inhabited by anthropomorphic animals. The series eventually bridged the two concepts, having the cast transported from their world to Earth. Interestingly, footage from this pilot was reused in the English intro for Sonic X. A character was shown in early promotional material that sent ripples of speculation through the fanbase. The character was a silver hedgehog with an evil grin that the fans dubbed Nazo after the image's file name, nazo.jpg. The character never appeared in the series, leading many to suspect that he was part of a scrapped Season 4. In 2015, a fan asked series producer Takashi Iizuka who the character was. He confirmed it was just Supersonic. The Sonic Boom sub-series was tailor-made for a Western audience, to the point that it wasn't even intended to air in Japan at first. Japan did eventually get the series under the name Sonic Toon. The co-executive producers for the series, Evan Bailey and Bill Freiberger, had played many Sonic games in the past. Bailey thought that playing well in the titles made you feel like you were slightly out of control. The writers incorporated that feeling into Sonic's character, making him feel impulsive and prone to acting without thinking. Freiberger thought that a franchise like Sonic was kept alive due to its constant reinventions by different creative teams, comparing it to the likes of Batman.
Did you know? Rick and Morty is based on a short animation that spoofed Back to the Future. The short was made by Rick and Morty's co-creator Justin Roiland before he was contacted by co-creator Dan Harmon. The short featured a day in the life of 2 characters who were intentional ripoffs of Doc Brown and Marty McFly from Back to the Future. The skit was originally designed as a jab at big companies who sent out cease and desist letters. Roiland stated on his website, "I had nothing to lose and my original intention was to call this Back to the Future, the new official Universal Studios cartoon featuring the new Doc Brown and Marty McFly, and then I just sit back and wait for the letter from their lawyers to arrive. It's actually why it's so filthy, I was just looking to troll a big studio." The desire to troll big corporations came from an earlier project by Roiland for the website Channel 101. In 2005, Roiland's show House of Cosby's debuted, which followed a man who creates dozens of Bill Cosby clones from one of the actor's hairs. Because the show used Cosby's name and likeness so prominently, it attracted the attention of Cosby's lawyers. Cosby's representatives sent Roiland and Channel 101's admin Dan Harmon a cease and desist order which effectively ended the series. Although only 4 episodes were officially made before the cease and desist, an unofficial 5th episode was produced where Cosby's lawyer performed sexual acts on Bill Cosby. The 4th episode of the Cosby's miniseries shows a cable box that can receive transmissions from anywhere in the universe. This idea was adapted into the interdimensional cable box first seen in the Rick and Morty episode Rick Steam Minutes. A few years after the events of House of Cosby's, Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland collaborated on another, shorter-lived series called Acceptable TV. Specifically, they made a comedy sketch series called Mr. Sprinkles, which ran as one of several sketches in each episode. The show was littered with Roiland and Harmon's offbeat sense of humor, and even includes 2 voices which sound strangely similar to Rick and Morty.
You know what she said to me?
Oh, Reggie, what'd she say, man?
I'll tell you what she said.
Unfortunately, Acceptable TV only ran for 1 season. Interestingly, the name Rick Sanchez was used in Acceptable TV long before Rick and Morty. The duo went their separate ways soon after. Harmon would go on to create the highly popular sitcom Community and prioritized his work on the show for several seasons. Several years later, Roiland was contacted by Harmon, who had been asked to create something for Adult Swim. Roiland showed Harmon the pilot and he loved it. Later, after reworking the concept and changing some obviously infringing character names, the idea became the show we know today. One question that creators are often asked relates to the origin of the theme song and the scene shown in the opening sequence. In an interview with the website TV Over Mind, Roiland said that while planning the theme song with composer Ryan Elder, he stumbled upon the idea of combining 2 popular theme songs. He envisioned a mashup between the themes of Doctor Who and the early 2000s science fiction series Farscape, which is evident in the final theme for the show. This song, however, wasn't originally made for Rick and Morty. It was made for another pilot Roiland had produced in 2012 called Dog World. The pilot had humans transported to another dimension where dogs ruled the world and kept humans as their pets, similar to the premise of the Rick and Morty episode Lawnmower Dog. As for the clips that played during the opening sequence, Roiland revealed that all of the scenes were real things which could appear at some point in an episode. He later clarified that this didn't necessarily mean that those episodes would appear soon, and that some of them could take much longer than others to appear. The show's voice recording also has several interesting tidbits. Rick's habit of breaking up lines and words with burps is one of his most notable character traits. In an interview with the Pointless podcast, Roiland stated that these burp takes are usually the last lines recorded while making an episode. Roiland usually drinks light beer and water to summon these belches, and waits for the right time to speak his lines. Because of this sit and wait approach, recording can be a lengthy process, and instead of recording short clips, the entire session is recorded to make sure they capture the right moment. Interestingly, the lighthouse chief in the episode Look Who's Purging Now was originally voiced by Dan Harmon. During a late-night meeting, Roiland convinced Harmon to record some jokes he was riffing in the character's voice. The results of the recording were, as Roiland put it, just gold. However, the track was too long to use in the scene. Roiland lamented the idea of cutting 4 minutes out of the recording and asked writer Ryan Ridley to do another, faster recording that would fit the scene. The character Mr. Jellybean, who appears in the episode Me Seeks and Destroy, bears a striking resemblance to another animated creation by Roiland. Crumply Crumplestein is the main character of a short named Unbelievable Tales, and aside from his physical appearance, he shares a strange inferred hobby with Mr. Jellybean: criminal activity involving children. Regarding the extremely dark nature of the animation, Roiland commented, "At this point in time, all I wanted to do was listen to an audience freak out. So I took this great idea about a creepy kid show host who was kidnapping kids and just went balls out." In another experiment with the audience, Adult Swim began uploading scenes from the then unreleased episode Rixty Minutes to Instagram. The catch was that each scene was only 15 seconds long, the maximum allowed by the website at the time. The episode consisted of 109 of these 15-second scenes, and the clips were uploaded in reverse order, meaning viewers had to wait for the complete set to be uploaded before they could view the episode from start to finish. Despite these downsides, the episode was uploaded in its entirety by early Friday, and especially enthusiastic fans didn't have to wait until the following Monday to get their fix. There was another promotion of sorts in the works, but this one didn't see the light of day. At one point in time, Roiland was contracted to do several commercials for the fast food chain Subway. These commercials mostly revolved around the idea of Morty excitedly claiming that he was the new Jared, and several recordings of the commercials were in the works. However, in the months running up to the commercial's release, Subway cut ties with spokesman Jared Fogle due to his arrest. Their focus on Fogle resulted in the commercials being discontinued. According to Roiland, they were split up into 8 different flash drives, half of which have since been lost. Although they avoided this controversy, the show's creators aren't ones to shy away from reality. According to Dan Harmon, the uncertain nature of Beth and Jerry's relationship is an attempt at portraying a more realistic marriage. Harmon commented on the couple, saying, "Jerry and Beth's dysfunctional relationship is based on the idea that when we watch media, the focus on marriage is always whether or not it's going to work, and we tell stories that either resolve or don't. But most people in this room, I imagine, grew up with parents who were, and still are, constantly on the brink of divorce." At a San Diego Comic-Con panel in 2015, comedian Brian Quinn recounted a night he spent with Justin Roiland. Quinn and Roiland decided to go to a strip club in New York City and have some fun, but Roiland didn't bring any money. To coerce the strippers into giving him a free dance, Roiland began talking in the voices of Rick and Morty, hoping the girls would recognize them from the show. And surprisingly, the plan worked. According to Quinn, it was just like being at a strip club with Rick and Morty, which is as amazing as it sounds and is the most genius thing I've ever seen inside or outside of an adult establishment. Because he didn't bring any money, he found girls who were fans of the show and he tipped them in sketches of Rick and Morty. Roiland added really shitty, drunken off-model drawings of Rick and Morty. A year later at San Diego Comic-Con 2016, the Rick and Morty team revealed more secrets about the show. Rick's catchphrase, was originally a reference to the sound Curly makes from the Three Stooges. According to writer Ryan Ridley, this line was simply a placeholder, and he expected Dan Harmon to update the line to something better for the final script. However, Harmon kept the line and replaced the whooping with wobble gobble lop glops. This story was expanded up in a Comic-Con interview with Kevin Smith for IMDb, where Ridley stated, "I wrote, Rick drops to the floor and spins around and goes woo 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 like Curly from the Three Stooges. Then Dan Harmon did his pass and added, he does the woof 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 like Arsenio Hall. And Justin was in the booth and was like, I don't know what any of this means, he says wubba lubba dub dub. Justin Roiland chimed in, saying, I thought it'd be funnier if Rick didn't get it right. Isn't that the Arsenio thing, wubba lubba dub dub? And somehow, that became a catchphrase.